Alright guys, it's officially time to update the video on 3D text. If you're interested in learning how to make text like this in After Effects, stick around. Alright, the first thing we're going to do is click on the new comp icon. And for this one I would recommend 1080 by 24 frames a second. Choosing 24 frames versus 30 frames just means there's less frames to render. And believe it or not, 3D can be quite a challenge for some computers to render. So for that fact, we'll go for 24. As far as the duration, let's set it to anywhere from 8 to 10 seconds, should be plenty. Alright, we'll click OK and get started. Okay, the first thing we want to do is add some text. So we'll go up and grab the text tool and we'll click on our screen and we'll type in whatever we want to type in. In my case, I'll stick with 3D text. And I can come over here to the character window and make any changes I might want to make. Currently I have a fill and a small stroke on this text. One thing I generally like to do is make my text pretty big. And if you want to do that too, go ahead and double click on your text to select it. And then come over to the text font size and just crank that value up. Alright, we'll go ahead and click off, grab the selection tool and just slide it into place. Another thing I like to do is grab the align tool and just click here and here. And that way we are centered. Okay, so the first thing we need to do to make this 3D is to come down to our switches and click the 3D icon. It looks like a little 3D box and you'll see it right there. And as soon as you click that, you'll notice over here that you have the option to change your render engine. So if you notice, you might be on Classic 3D. That's what After Effects defaults to. But if you want to do true 3D, then you need to come down to the Cinema 4D renderer. And once you click that, you can then come back to your text and you'll notice that you have two additional parameters down here, or groups of parameters I should say. One is geometry options, and this is where all the fun stuff happens. It's here that we'll go down to extrusion depth and crank that up anywhere from 50 to 100. So we'll start with 50. And then if you want to crank up your bevel depth, you can do that as well. That's going to be the sort of the edges of the letters. And we have some different bevel styles we can choose from: angular, concave, and convex. And you won't notice a big difference with these right now, but when we get some light on here, you should see some changes. So, now that we have our 3D text, I just came down here to my view and changed it from active camera to custom number 1. And you can see that it's extruded and it actually looks okay, mainly because we have that stroke on there. But if I were to click the text and take that stroke off, the text would not look terribly interesting. And that is because 3D text generally needs something to help set it off. A light, an HDRI file, we can add side brightness to it. I'll go through the 3 main ways to light your 3D text and the differences in the looks that it'll give you. For now, let's go ahead and add a floor so we can create a reflection. I'll go back to my active camera view and I'm just going to come up and go Layer, New, Solid. And it really doesn't matter what color your solid is. I would say avoid black because that seems to cause some problems. But you'll notice that once we crank up our reflection value, this color is going to go away. So I'll go ahead and click here. And just like I did for the text, I'm going to go over and make this layer 3D. And once I've done that, I'm going to rotate this back to 90 degrees. Now, you can do that either manually, or you can come down to the layer over here and just hit R for rotation. And we want to rotate it on the X axis. I want it exactly 90 degrees, so I'm just going to come down and type in 90 into the X rotation value. And you can see that basically that flattens it out, so now we're kind of looking like straight into a piece of paper. And so what we want to do next is grab this arrow here for our Z control and just start to bring it down so that it's right at the bottom of the text. Notice I can go up just a little bit before I start to see that text disappearing into the bottom. You're welcome to scale this up as big as you want, but one thing you'll notice is that it doesn't really fill the screen. And no matter how much you scale this up, it's not going to fill this screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab a camera and use that to tilt this just a little bit so we can fill the screen with the floor. So let's go ahead and go up to Layer, New, camera. And as far as the camera settings, the default settings are fine. I would recommend something like a 35 or 50 millimeter lens. In this case, I'll go 50, and we'll click OK. And notice not much changes, but now that I have a camera, I can use the orbit tool to sort of rotate this a little bit, and that's going to help show off the 3D a little better, and I can use that as a way to fill the screen with this background. So you can go up to the upper right, and we have 3 camera tools up here. The one we're looking at is the orbit tool, but you can also just come down here and click the C key. Notice the C key will scroll through all 3 of those tools. Alright, so now that I've got my camera added, I'm going to go ahead and grab the orbit tool, and I'm going to try to sort of create like a 45-degree angle on this text. And this is going to take a couple of tries here, so I'm going to click and kind of push it up this way, and then I'm going to hit the C key again and just sort of drag it along the X-axis and then bring it down a little bit. And then I'm going to switch back to the orbit tool and kind of do that again, pushing it up towards the upper left, and then hit the C key and keep dragging it down. And you can see what I'm doing is I'm starting to create some angle on the camera. And again, by pushing it one more time, I should be good. We'll hit the C key and drag it down. And now you can see that I've kind of created some angle. So now we have our text and our floor. We've added a camera and we've moved it just a little bit. And now what we need to do is create our reflection. And the way we're going to do that is by selecting the ground. In fact, I'm going to click on it, hit the return key, and just call it floor. And then I'm going to open it up and go down to its material options. If I open up material options and I come down to where it says reflection intensity, I can crank that up to 100%. And you can see that it is now reflecting 100% of our text. But one thing you'll notice is that with the exception of my sort of low resolution here, if I pop this into full resolution, you can see that the reflection is really sharp, and that's sort of unrealistic. So I'm going to come down to reflection sharpness right underneath reflection intensity and set that down to about 50%. And that'll create what we call fall off. And at this point, we're pretty much good. What we need to do now is figure out how we want to make this text light up. And there's 3 ways to do it. First thing I could do is I could select the text, open up the drop down, and go over to where it says animate. If we go down to where it says side, color, brightness, we can click that, and that's going to add a range selector that's going to allow us to simply darken the sides. So if I click on that and I drag it to the left, you'll see that we start to get some pop to that 3D text. And that's probably the easiest or most basic way to do it. Now that's one of 3 ways to do it right there. So I'll show you the 2 other ways right now. If we turn off the animator and the range selector, we're back to where we started. And another way that we could light this, and probably a more dramatic way to light it, is to go up to Layer, New, Light. And up here we could add a parallel light, or we could even add a spotlight. So if we add a parallel light, you'll see that that's going to basically give us some nice pop, and it really makes the bevel stand out a lot more. You'll notice that we're also getting some pretty heavy shadows in here, and a few ways that you could fix that might be to move the light a little bit. Let me click OK. Move the light to the side a little bit, and then grab the point of interest and drag that over here. And as you tweak the light, you'll start to see that different things start to show up a little better. Again, just moving the light is going to give you a little bit different angle. It might take a second for this to render. You can even try bringing it up a little bit and then pointing the point of interest right there. And as you can see, that really starts to light up the text and show off that 3D. Okay, and the final and most interesting way to light this is by using an HDRI file. An HDRI file looks a little something like this. I have a couple right here. Now, if you get on the internet, you can search, and there's plenty of free HDRI files out there. And so one thing I might recommend is to pick one that's a little brighter. The darker ones tend to leave you with a pretty dark image. So if I bring this HDRI file down and I drop it on my timeline, all I have to do to make that the source of light for this scene is to make it 3D and then to go up to Layer, Environment Layer. If I click right there, you'll see that that will become the source of light for this entire project. Now, and you can see that if I turn the light off, that the HDRI file doesn't really do anything to the text. It's adding light to the background. So if we want the text to also be lit by the HDRI file, all we have to do is go down to our text, open it up, go down to Material Options, and turn on its reflection intensity, just like we did for the floor. So if I crank that value up, now we get some really cool looking 3D text. And the best part about HDRI files is that if you don't like what you get, you can rotate the HDRI file and you will get almost a completely different look. So if I go down to the HDRI file and I hit R for rotation, I'll just grab the X value and crank that up to, I don't know, 90 degrees or so. Doesn't matter. Give it a second and now it looks relatively different. We could also do the same thing, again, just randomly grabbing the Z rotation and cranking that up to 99 or so. And as you can see, we'll just get different results each time we change that rotation. Now, if I come over here, I do have my HDRI file lighting the scene, but let's go ahead and add that light back in. So now we're using a parallel light and the HDRI file, and you notice that we can kind of stack those two techniques and get a really cool looking effect. We don't need to use the side brightness anymore, that's not going to help us, but adding a parallel light or a spotlight, we could go in and click that, change it to something a little more dramatic like a spotlight, and that's just going to, again, change some of the highlights a little bit, give us some flexibility. You can see here I'm just grabbing the point of interest and moving it around a little bit. And again, you can try moving that light to a different position. Just try to make sure you keep that point of interest pointed at your text. And that's pretty much it. Now let's go ahead and add just a quick movement in here to add a little bit of rotation on this. So all I'm going to do to make this move is move the camera. And I'll do that by just coming over here and pretty much keyframing all of my rotation and my orientation and my position values for the camera. Because as I use the orbit tool, I'm going to be adjusting all of those settings. So I'm going to hit the C key, come over here, and we've got those keyframes, so we'll drag the playhead forward about 3 or 4 seconds. And then I'm just going to sort of nudge this over to the right. Now again, notice I kind of have to push it off screen, but that's okay. I'm just going to hit the C key again and then slide it back on. It's a little tricky to rotate with the orbit tool, but a little bit of practice, you'll get the hang of it. So I just keep kind of dragging it off to the right, and then give it a second, and then hit the C key again until I get the little cross-looking tool and drag it back. So now if we back it up and take a quick look. Alright, so we got our little move, looks pretty good. Our HDRI is creating some cool effects, and that is one way that you can get some cool looking 3D text in After Effects with very few steps. Alright guys, if this helped, do me a favor and hit that like and subscribe button and stay tuned because I'll have more 3D videos coming.